Here in the Philippines, jeepneys are the kings of the road. You can see jeepneys in your daily commute, or maybe even you use jeepneys when you're going to different places. However, we're not going into the history of jeepneys, but rather the current situation of jeepney drivers. Can their income pull them out of poverty? How can jeepney drivers provide for the basic needs of their family? This is Filipino Jeepney Drivers, a full stop on the road of poverty. Say hello to your presenters, Kyanarich Balangue, Jaybee Dulin, Isaac Lagasca, Maan Magbojos, Mark Sajonas, and Sean Villanueva. We are from DSM Econ A52, academic year 2020 to 2021, and this is in partial fulfillment of our requirements. In this presentation, we will be tackling what is going on in the poverty line of the Philippines. What is the current status of unemployment in the Philippines? What are the key factors that hinder poor people from getting out of the poverty line? The factors related to unemployment or why unemployment occurs, the pandemic and jeepney drivers, and lastly, jeepney drivers versus e-jeepneys. Let's start off with what is going on in the poverty line of the Philippines.
According to Philip Gerson of the International Monetary Fund, the income distribution in the Philippines is highly uneven, and poverty rates are higher than in other ASEAN countries. Although the poverty rate has declined, it is still lower in our country, so income inequality is still persistent. Slow progress has been consistent over time, and the reason for this is due to economic policies that gave less importance to agriculture, where most of the poor earn their income. This led to underinvestment in the supposed-to-be resources to help the poor and their potential for human capital development. The economic policies before were gearing towards industrial manufacturing industry. Some studies have shown that poverty is nothing but a concrete manifestation of gross economic and social inequities. Redistributing wealth and opportunities is viewed as the key to winning the war on poverty. Economic growth does not at all benefit the poor, and focusing on such growth rather than redistributive reforms is seen to exacerbate inequities. According to Oxford Business Group, while improving, the country's Gini index, which is the measure of income distribution resembling total equality, which is 0, or total inequality, which is equal to 100, is also elevated, standing at 42.2 in 2012 and 40.1 in 2015. Between 1985 and 2015, the Philippines never dropped below 40 in the index. Unemployment has also been on the rise, and underemployment still persists, leaving low-income people vulnerable to economic shocks. Unfortunately, poverty continues to rise in the Philippines, especially now that we have limited opportunities to get a job due to the pandemic. Our fight against poverty is still ongoing, and I really hope that this video will open each and everyone's eyes that poverty is there, but it is preventable.
With the damages that the pandemic has brought to the Filipino nation, we cannot doubt that employment has been a concern to every social class that we have. Shutting down of operations, cutting down on manpower, and the shift towards online jobs has brought many citizens at risk for survival. The downfall of the economic state of the country, the underlying terms in risking health to work, and other factors have brought many Filipinos torn on having to choose between health or survival. First, we must note how the Philippine government qualifies an unemployed citizen. It is any person that is 15 years old and above who is either a Filipino that does not have work, currently available for work, and is also looking for work. Secondly, he is someone who does not have work, currently available for work, but is not looking for work due to tiredness, belief that there is no work available, temporary illness, disability, bad weather, waiting for a job recall, and waiting for the results of a previous job application. In a report done by the Philippine Statistics regarding the April 2020 Labor Force Survey, it showed that the unemployment rate rose to 17.7% with over 7.3 million Filipinos unemployed. With the circumstances brought by COVID-19, this was the highest recorded unemployment rate of the country. In the report, it was also mentioned that every region in the country reported that they had double-digit unemployment rates. The Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao stood out with 29.8%, followed by Region 3, the Central Luzon with 27.3%, and the Cordillera Administrative Region with 25.3%. Adding to this information, the 17.7% happened during the second quarter of 2020, specifically during the months of February, March, and April. These were also the months when COVID-19 entered the country, thus the quarantine and the increase in unemployment. The third quarter of 2020, however, showed that the unemployment rate decreased to 9.96%, and during the fourth quarter, it even decreased to 8.73%. The decrease of unemployment rate was due to how companies and other businesses were able to figure out how to manage work despite the pandemic. The rise of courier businesses, pabilis services, and other flexible jobs were prevalent even today. Despite the easing situations we have as the COVID-19 vaccine enters the country, we can say that more jobs will return this year. But with unemployment comes lack of income, which have led to poverty today. And as the Philippine government expects, it is more likely that the Filipinos whom have fallen poor last 2020 may remain poor in the year of 2021.
A large number of people are now living in shacks and small houses that they built in slums and squatter settlements. They lack minimal public services like electricity, water, drainage, education, and health services. The reason for this is that there is an increased emphasis and bias towards urban development rather than also developing rural places that should have been beneficial for these people who were from rural areas and now living in the slums, not being given enough safety nets. There is this term called poverty trap. People who do not have proper education, access to healthcare, and jobs to buy the things that they need are unable to move from one class to another. This is because there are different uncertainties that happen in our lives. Not everything is stable. There are times when they get enough money to feed their families in a day, and times when they have to use that money for other priorities or emergencies. This happens to everyone, but to think that they only have enough money for the day makes it harder for them to get out of poverty. This happens to every generation, and by sending them to a really good school and getting a proper job is the way for them to get out of poverty. This root cause of these problems is the government is not giving enough subsidies and support even on the importance of education and public health. Social mobility is hard because not having enough money and opportunities will hinder them to catch up with others, especially with the increasing prices of goods and services today.
Despite a booming, fast-growing economy over the last 10 years, unemployment remains a constant issue in the Philippines with over 100 million inhabitants, especially when the COVID-19 pandemic hit in the first quarter of 2020. The Philippines saw a rapid economic growth prior to the COVID-19 pandemic despite a high unemployment rate. The Philippines have an average of 6.38% GDP growth rate from 2010 to 2019, while posing an average of 6.31% unemployment rate. And the country has a higher GDP rate than the neighboring Thailand, which has 3.64%, and Vietnam, which is 5.76%, according to the 2019 data from World Bank. But why does unemployment in the Philippines still persist? One reason is that job creation has struggled to keep pace with an ever-expanding population. According to Salvosa, in 3 of the past 5 years, the number of people entering in the job market has been greater than the number of jobs created, as this situation highlights the difficulty of spreading the benefits of economic growth and suggests that they have yet to trickle down to more deprived areas. So the participation and partaking of laborers in the workforce remains relatively low, with an estimate of about 65% of the population aged 15 and above looking for opportunities and jobs available domestically, which sees this as one of the lowest in the Southeast Asian region. This compares with 78% in Vietnam, 72% in Thailand, and 68% in Indonesia in the data presented by Salvosa. This is supported by the high standard and value given on education in the Philippines, where education is seen as an important factor for Filipinos, and that young Filipinos typically wait until they graduate college before looking at entering in the labor market, contributing to the lower participation rate for the region, as other countries within the region look and enter the workforce earlier. Another factor may be the low quality of jobs available. According to Salvosa, in the past 3 to 5 years, an average of just 58% of workers in both formal and informal employment were in what were described as paid jobs. Of the rest, 28% were self-employed with no guaranteed income, and 11% worked on family-owned farms or other businesses where they typically receive food and lodging but no actual cash.
Given all the issues that the world is facing, especially this time that we are still in the midst of the pandemic, we can still see the growing numbers of victims caused by COVID-19 virus that affected the whole world. Besides, industries and businesses are severely disrupted due to the implemented measures by the government such as lockdowns, localized work suspension, and others to control the spread of the virus. With this, millions of Filipino workers lose their jobs, including the jeepney drivers. As mass public transportation was suspended, hundreds of thousands families were affected as jeepney drivers were not able to earn money from their main source of livelihood. Because of hunger, homelessness, and financial hardships, some of the 600,000 jeepney drivers nationwide have built small online businesses and have shifted to delivery services. However, as many informal workers encounter, they don't also get enough return to suffice their necessities.
Wala na akong mapunta, wala na matakbuhan. Nakakaya naman sa mga kamag-anak namin eh. Kasi mangingi kami, araw-araw nakakaya naman. Kaya ginawa namin, nilak loob namin lahat mga kapwa-driver namin na mangingi tayo sa mga tao na gusto tumulong sa atin para meron tayong pagkain araw-araw.
Minsan may nagbibigay dito kahit magkano, tatanggapin naman po namin, malaking pasalamat po namin doon kahit pa paano makakain ng maayos, pero kadalasan lang po talaga yung kakain kami ng isang beses sa isang araw.
These unemployed jeepney drivers of our country depicts what is actually happening in the economy. With income and debts piling up, the Philippine economy plunges into recession. This calls for inclusive solutions and urges the Philippine government to set aside projects that are not relevant in today's situation and to prioritize the people who are in need, like the unemployed jeepney drivers.
As far as everyone is concerned, change is constant. As mentioned above, there has been an issue about modernization with Philippine jeepneys before. It has been repeatedly in the headlines that jeepney drivers were on transportation strike for days. The government and the jeepney drivers have different concerns regarding the modernization, and they couldn't seem to get to an agreement. On the side of the government, they aim to lessen the contributors for air pollution and to follow a certain standard for a safe, reliable, and predictable public transportation. On the other hand, the jeepney drivers, whose only source of income is their jeepney, and who are against the jeepney modernization simply because they could not afford it. The only way that this would work is if the government imposes laws or changes that are both beneficial to the government and the jeepney drivers. According to CNN Philippines, to be able to get a jeepney that is modern and with respect to the LTFRB guidelines, it would cost around 1.6 million pesos. The steps in the process to achieve the goal of jeepney modernization should be realistic. The jeepney drivers could possibly agree to this change if the government offers several options for aid to be able to avail the e-jeepney. If and when these jeepney drivers have availed the e-jeepneys, then there will be less hindrances in having an income. Unemployment rate will decrease
since they will have a fixed job, and poverty rate will also decrease because there will be a stable income. Most jeepney drivers are left to find other sources of income because their old jeepneys gave up before they could even reach the age of retirement. There are only two reasons why jeepney drivers stop operating. One is when they do transportation strikes because they demand an additional 1 or 2 pesos in their fares, in line with the increasing price of gasoline. Number 2 is when the government wanted to impose this jeepney modernization, which is quite impossible for a majority of the jeepney drivers given the income that they have and the cost to achieve this change. Decreasing unemployment and poverty, the government and the people who are affected by these prospective changes should meet halfway. This can be achieved by providing continuous income and equal opportunities for everyone.